Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Blessed be his glorious name, whose kingdom is forever and ever. Yeshua, the Messiah, he is Lord. Amen. Now, I want to start with just a brief overview, and I promise this is not I'm not doing like a 1 hour and a half teaching tonight. I'm literally just going to talk for a little bit, field a couple questions, and then we're just going to fellowship, and we're going to eat, and we're going to have a good time. Sound good? Yeah. Awesome. Now, here's what we want to do first. The sequence and the meaning, okay? This is something that might be review for some of you and may be totally new for others. So here's what we want to do is just discuss the sequence. Now, we have 7 feasts of our God, potentially 8 if you count Shemini Atzeret. But the very first one is what? Passover. That happens in the first of the year. Incidentally, you'll see online if you do some research or something, it's hard to find information about Yom Teruah because everybody calls it what? Rosh Hashanah. Now that is not a biblical feast or festival or observance of any kind. That is entirely tradition. That is a Jewish tradition.
Which is
that
Teruah?
Yom Teruah is just a tradition of the Jews. If people say that's a Jewish festival, yeah, that is a Jewish festival. Yes, Rosh Hashanah is a Jewish tradition festival. Yom Teruah is biblical. Go ahead.
Isn't that based off the beginning of their civil year?
That's the beginning of their civil year, but the Bible doesn't say anything about that. And so, and that's great. I have no problem with tradition. We just make sure that it's not elevated to the level of a command, okay? Because the Bible doesn't command us to observe Rosh Hashanah. It's awkward. People have different New Years. You got the Chinese New Year, and the American New Year is in the middle of the winter. And in ancient Babylon, they had 4 New Years every year. Yeah, I don't know how you have a New Year 4 times throughout the year, but apparently they like to party, and so there you go. You got 4 New Years. But the Bible talks about when does the New Year begin according to the biblical reckoning? That would be Passover in Nisan, if you want to call it Nisan, or the month of Abib, or whatever, And that makes sense to me because you've got things coming back to life and springtime coming, that the cycle is starting over. And that seems like the first of the year to me. I like that. I like that. That's not a tradition. That's biblical. It says the first month. If you're saying that's the first month of the year, yeah, it's the beginning of a new year, right? So, yeah. What's that?
Is it Nisan?
Nisan. So it's called Nisan, but in the Bible, the months aren't really given any names. Some people think that the first biblical month of the new year is called Abib, but that's not literally the name of the month. That's something that literally means a fresh, budding green thing. That's not the name of the month. It's just what's happening in that month.
I did see that.
Yeah.
But the months are given numbers.
Yes, right.
You see that in the Old Testament, on the 6th day of the
Right,
month.
right. They just given numbers, just like the days of the week, But we have months, names of days and weeks. All of our names of the months and dates of the day of the week are mostly pagan deities, and that's that's okay. I'm not one of those people who says don't say Wednesday because that's just bad. It's okay. It's okay. But I'm not your God, so don't listen to me. Who was saying something? Keith, go ahead.
I think the only reason they call Aviv or the Aviv is because the Scripture says, "I brought you out in the month of the Aviv."
Right.
Which
right.
is spring.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And that makes good sense. So in the sequence here, Passover starts off the sequence, and we had Passover not too long ago. It's in the 7th month already. I guess that was 6 months ago. What an awesome time that was. And then just immediately after that is the Feast of Unleavened Bread called Matzot. And then we have the Bikurim, which is the first fruits, which has to do... Now, hold on just a sec. And then we're moving on to the 4th one, which is Shavuot. Now, those are the spring into the early summer festivals, which really picture what, do you know? What are those things tied into? The harvest, yes, the first of the harvest, absolutely. What are they foreshadowing a prophetic picture of? The first coming of the Messiah Yeshua, absolutely. You can see, if you've ever watched any of the Hebrew roots teachers online, you can see, Passover, where Yeshua is the Passover lamb and he is, crucified right then. He becomes the Passover lamb. This Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now that's a little bit tricky one. How do you interpret and bring together the Feast of Unleavened Bread with something that was going on with Messiah Yeshua? Tracy?
That's the time of the burial.
Yeah.
The putting to death of the flesh. And
Right.
Sin,
Right.
Unleavened bread.
Excellent.
And false doctrine.
Yep, absolutely. Now the Bikurim, what do you say about that? Oh, go ahead.
Isn't it also where I remember part of the bread is under a shroud? It's under.
Yes.
So part of it's hidden.
Right.
And so we don't see that right now.
Right.
But we'll see that later.
That's right. That's right.
Foreshadowing of the Messiah.
Of the yeah, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the Bikurim, Keith, were you going to address that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the first fruits. So he was the first fruits.
He was the first fruits from the dead.
Then there's some mention about that other graves were cracked open at the crucifixion.
Right.
They weren't risen until he rose, and then he went and got them, and he brought them up also.
Right.
So I don't know if that's possibly the 24 elders.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I've always wondered that. Those people, if they were resurrected, what did they do? Did they go?
Because he went up first, but then he offered his father probably
A first fruits of his people. That's a great idea that I've heard before. I like that. It's very interesting. And then Shavuot, which we have really just covered a couple of weeks back when we were studying the book of Acts in chapter 2, when they call it Pentecost, of course. The Greek rendition of that is Pentecost, and so that is the coming of the Holy Spirit. And then we get into the fall festivals, and the information on these festivals is a little sparser. It's a little more sparse because these haven't been fulfilled prophetically yet. The discussion about these being fulfilled is prophetic still for the future, where you can see Paul and John and Yeshua talking about these 2,000 years ago, and they still haven't happened yet, in a sense that these festivals are a prophetic foreshadowing of something that is still future to us. And so if you do some research online about these three festivals, you're going to find a tremendous amount of speculation. And I don't have anything to offer you other than speculation because it hasn't been fulfilled yet. And we know also that just like in the days of the Messiah Yeshua when he was walking the earth, I have done a minor study, not a big one. I'd like to do a bigger one because I find it fascinating. What was the perspective at the time of Yeshua? Because they had all these prophetic shadow pictures themselves, and I think they knew what was going on. We talked about this when we studied the book of Matthew, how there was a messianic fervor in those days, like they just knew the time was ripe and the Messiah was coming, and there was a prophetic fervor about what's going on, and they had specific ideas about how these prophecies were going to be fulfilled. And it turns out that they were completely wrong in those days. Yeah. They were completely wrong. What they interpreted as, that's a spiritual rendition, happened literally. And what they thought might have been a literal rendition happened spiritually. They had it completely backwards. And it makes me wonder, how much do we have backwards? Yes?
So what, for example, did they have backwards? What did they think was spiritual?
I think that they kind of anticipated... there's so many different elements to that, and that's a whole broad discussion, but let me just paint with some really broad strokes here. And like I said, I didn't do a ton of research, but it was just fascinating to me, and this needs to be researched further. It's a great research project for anybody who wants to look into it, but you'd have to dig into the Mishnah and the Talmud, the rabbinic writings, to figure out what was the prophetic ideas in those days. And what I can discern is that they didn't anticipate the Messiah being a regular human figure. They thought that was kind of a spiritual thing, and then when this guy shows up, who's just apparently a normal guy, that threw them for a loop. They didn't understand that it was a literal human being who was, and now we're not getting into his divinity or anything, but it really kind of confused them because they saw something totally different in that regard. Him dying and being raised from the dead, they didn't have any idea what to do with those shadow pictures that they read in Isaiah 53. To the point, like today, I know that you guys are probably aware that if you speak with a Hebrew person about Jesus and how he's the Messiah, and you bring up, you reference Isaiah 53, you start quoting it to them, they think you're making it up because they've never read Isaiah 53. They are steered well clear of Isaiah 53.
It's true.
It very much is true because it's a dead giveaway. And I don't know if somehow they just overlooked it or I don't know.
It just wasn't even taught.
Yeah.
Over at Temple High, where my best friend went, she said that they didn't even study the prophets at all. I'm like, you didn't study the prophets?
Yeah.
She's like, no, they just weren't ever talked about.
Well, in Judaism, they study, a Jew who is a devoutly religious person will generally study the Talmud. They have a base knowledge and understanding of the Torah, but the Talmud is a lot of it is commentary on the Torah, and so it's mostly about the Torah. There's not a lot of study about the writings of the prophets. There is definitely some stuff about the Psalms and Proverbs, but the prophets play a little bit of a more minor role in regards to, especially to the portions that I put up there each week with the Torah portion and the Haftarah. If there is some tie-in for the Haftarah, they'll study that. But if they didn't find a passage that links up together real nicely, it seems like that the prophets are just, it's a great mystery. And frankly, I would say that in regards to Christianity as a whole, there's not a lot of study of the prophets. They're only interested in the prophets insofar as they can see from the prophets that it says something about Jesus. Because if you're looking at many of the prophets, there are great woes and judgments regarding the nation of Israel. And of course, with our ideas about having a dual covenant theology where, that stuff's for the Jews and this stuff's for us, well, to Christians it doesn't make any difference. And then when you see these tremendous blessings that are promised in the Torah and in the writings, well, we'll take those. So we won't take the woes, but we'll take, and I think we had better be re-examining that, because I think all apply. If we read Romans chapter 11, we see that we are grafted into the nation of Israel, and so whether you like it or not, you are an Israelite. And you're going to partake of the woes and the blessings, depending upon your obedience and your faithfulness to God, which shouldn't surprise you. There's no free lunch.
Right.
there's no free lunch. So that's when we're looking at these next three feast days here. The information is a little bit sparse. And so I want to propose a few ideas to you and have you take a look at these, and you guys can study it out further and make your own judgments, but don't stand on a soapbox and don't make any hard and fast ideas, because it's really speculative.
One tidbit.
Please do.
In Revelation, when Jesus is talking to John, he says he's the Alpha and the Omega. In the Greek, the word Alpha is spelled out, and the Omega is not. It's just the symbolic Omega. And I think that's pointing out that the first coming of Jesus has been shown to us.
Oh, that's interesting.
Maybe someday that Omega will be spelled out.
Interesting. That is interesting. Yeah. So here's what the text says. If you look in Leviticus 23, and we all look in Leviticus 23 regarding the holy days of our God, and in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 24, is where we get the information regarding this particular feast day that we are dealing with tonight. It says here, in the 7th month, the first of the month is to be for you a day of complete rest for remembering, a holy convocation announced with blasts of alarm, or you might say a trumpet blast or a shofar blast or something like that. Do not do any kind of ordinary work, and bring an offering made by fire to Jehovah. Now, the relevant portion that I just want to draw your attention to is this little sequence here that says these are your instructions. It's a Sabbath, so you're to do no ordinary work. It's a memorial of the blowing of a shofar, a trumpet, that word, what is that word, Tracy?
Teruah?
No, the word that's translated here, blasts of alarm of some kind.
23, 24?
23, 24, yeah. Does anybody have that Hebrew word there? Is it rikon or something like that? I've forgotten what it is. But when you have it, just let me know. That word literally has to do with shouting, a great clamor. Teruah. Okay, yeah, it is teruah. I apologize. I was thinking of a different word. I apologize, Tracy. You are correct. So teruah can be translated multiple ways. Clamor, alarm, shouting. You can see, like, when the people were circling the walls of Jericho, they blew their horns, trumpets, and they all shouted. All of those things are described using the same word, teruah. So what we have is a memorial of blowing, shouting, screaming, trumpets, something. A mikra, a convocation, right? Which is a gathering or a reading. It could be translated either way. What we have going on right here is a mikra, a gathering, a congregation. If we're coming together for a public reading or public worship, public prayer, public reading of the Torah, those are all describing the same thing. And then it is kodesh, holy, a holy mikra, a holy gathering to remember a memorial of blowing, of alarms of some kind. Now, remember, this is given to us in Leviticus 23. So, you tell me, what are we remembering? Yes?
We're remembering the giving of the commandments on Sinai.
Most people would think so. But isn't that what Shavuot is all about? Angela?
This kind of has something to do with a link, and I wish someone would explain this and figure it out, between Jericho, the story about Jericho and Revelation, because you have these cycles of 7. You have the harlot Rahab being saved because she's the red cord.
Right.
There's something there that helps us understand those 7s in Revelation, and
Right.
I was hoping that you would have figured something.
You were hoping that I would have figured it out? Yeah, good luck. I have not figured that out, just FYI. No, and you know what's interesting, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, you all know that, but the rendering of this text could be saying a memorial of blowing or alarm or sounds of some kind, or a memorial with blowing or alarms or sounds of some kind. So it's not terribly clear. And are we to just be, because the only time that blowing or shouting or trumpets of some kind has even happened in the Bible up until this point, if it is a memorial of something, a memorial is memorializing something that happened in the past, right? You're remembering something that happened in the past. The only time that trumpets have been blown or alarm sounds have been going off here is when the Torah came on Mount Sinai. But is it something looking back, or is it something looking forward? Because it could be rendered as a memorial with blowing, not a memorial of blowing. That's a good... You don't really know what to do with that. Angela?
Time doesn't work that way for him.
And that's a good point.
It's not linear, and I think this is about. Think about what happened in Jericho when that happened. The stones fell down. And what happens in Revelation? You have rocks falling everywhere. I think this is a memorial of something in the future, but we see things so linear. We think it needs to have already happened on our timeline, and we don't remember that he doesn't.
I totally agree with that.
Interact with time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And every time that I have taught you guys and talked with you guys about Yom Teruah, I have proposed to you this is not a memorial of necessarily of something that happened prior to this, but something that's future. That's my own opinion about that. Tracy?
Yeah, that word is like also remembrance. It's like There's, I think, a scripture in Zechariah that says, I will not forget you. Behold, I have carved you on the palms of my hands.
Right, right.
So something that helps you to remember.
Right.
Something that will happen.
Right.
So we do these things as rehearsals
Yep.
for what is to come.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I would just encourage you to think about that. It's not necessarily remembering something that happened in the past, because I think that's what Shavuot is all about, is the remembering of the blowing of the trumpets on Mount Sinai and the Torah being given and the Holy Spirit coming on Pentecost. That's all tied together. I think this is something future. Mike?
I wonder too, like, so the commands were given, but then they don't want to hear it themselves, so he goes up for 40 days.
Right.
He comes back down, not really sure how long he was there before he goes up for an additional 40 days.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that put us in the timeline? Are we close to?
Well, and we've talked about this before. If you take 40 Jubilee years, that's 2,000 years.
Oh.
If you think that period of 40 is always a period of trial or testing, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 days when Moses was on the mountain, 40 days when Yeshua was being tested in the wilderness. That's always a period of testing and trial. And if you kind of look at, this period between Yeshua's first coming and potentially his second coming after a 2,000-year period of gap, it was actually one of my children who said, what maybe that's 40 jubilees. A jubilee is 50 years. You multiply 50 years times 40, you got 2,000 years. It's a fascinating theory. I don't know what to do with that, but it's really, really interesting. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in another Bible study we've been studying. We're starting to work our way through Revelation.
Oh boy!
And it's interesting because John, when his first encounter, when he's getting these visions from the Lord, he says in Revelation 1:10, on the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet.
That's right.
Which said, and then later on he says, and the trumpet said. So
Yeah.
If these feasts are to remind us of the second coming,
Right.
maybe we're supposed to think of the Lord as a trumpet. That when he comes back, he's going to be talking not as a meek lamb, like he did in the first coming,
right,
but as a trumpet.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's definitely powerful.
At Sinai, the trumpet got louder and louder, whereas the trumpet, it gets quieter.
Yeah, I think that's what freaked them out.
And in the Arch of Triumph, I think there's the carving or Vespasian where he sacked Jerusalem.
Right.
There's two silver trumpets
that
he took from the temple, and I think that may represent that the first trumpet has been blown at Sinai, and the second trumpet, with the silver representing redemption, the second trumpet is going to be blown soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Darren?
I was doing my study, and they say in the Zohar, they believe that it was celebrating creation.
Yes, that is true. The traditional idea about Rosh Hashanah is something about celebrating creation. That is true. Yeah. Tracy?
Are you going to talk about this date, like the moon cycle around this day?
With the new moon blowing of the trumpets? I was going to deal with that in relation to Nehemiah chapter 8, but I didn't figure we'd have enough time to do that. Do you want to say a few words about that?
I was just going to say, I think this day symbolizes the coming of the bridegroom. The announcement that said, behold, the bridegroom is coming. When you look at Matthew chapter 25 with the Carol of the Ten Virgins, that at midnight a cry or clamor was heard, which is this word teruah in Hebrew. I don't know what it is in Greek, comparably, but it means the same thing. That it's a cry or a clamor that has gone out.
Right.
He's coming.
Yep.
And those who were ready went in, and those who were not were shut out. But there's clues in the scriptures as far as like the hidden day, the day that no man knows, because this is the only day that takes place on a new moon, a concealed moon, because you don't know when.
You don't know when it is until you see it.
And I think that's a clue as to what he means. So he says, be watching.
Right.
Because you don't know the day or hour is
Right.
the clue for this day. And that fits in because it's the 5th feast day.
Right.
With the 7 churches in Revelation.
Yep.
He says the same thing to the 5th church. He
Right.
says, I come
Watch.
in a day and an hour you don't know,
Right.
and if you are worthy, you can walk with me in white, which is a shout out to Day of Atonement when we walk in white.
Right.
Wears
Right.
white
Yeah.
on that day. So.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Very cool. So, yeah, there's some. Isn't this stuff amazing? This is amazing stuff.
Just put out a video about
Yes, she
what
did.
this day might represent spiritually.
Yep.
To
Yep.
give you information.
Yeah, definitely take a look at Tracy's website and her YouTube page. It's Sowing the Word of God. You can find it online, and she's got some great stuff on there. Specifically, this teaching about the day, that's the Day of Atonement, right?
That was
Oh, right. That's right. That's right. That's right. So I want to take a look at Exodus 19:16, just kind of because it's the first mention, the first reference to the sound of the trumpet, you know, and it's just fascinating. And Jimmy Stewart here was saying something about that a moment ago, which I find just fascinating, and I think probably freaked them out was the intensity of this trumpet. So I want to read this to you in Exodus 19:16. It says, "It came to be on the 3rd day, at the coming of the morning, that there came to be sounds and flashes and a heavy cloud on the mount, and the sound of a shofar, exceedingly loud. Then all the people who were in the camp trembled. Yet Moses brought the people forth from the camp to meet the one, Elohim. So they stationed themselves at the nether part of the mountain. As for Mount Sinai, all of it smoked in view of the fact that Yehovah descended on it in fire. Its smoke ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the entire mountain trembled exceedingly. While the sound of the shofar came to be going, becoming exceedingly stronger, Moses was speaking, and the one, Elohim, was answering with a loud voice. Yehovah descended on Mount Sinai to the summit of the mountain. Then Yehovah called Moshe to the summit of the mountain, and Moses ascended." So there you have the first mention of the shofar and the sound of the shofar, which is absolutely fascinating. And that always it never occurred to me until just a year ago when I was researching this, exactly what James was talking about with the fact that, you know, when a human blows a trumpet or yells or something, the sound diminishes because you're running out of breath.
That's true.
But this one got started really loud and just kept getting louder. There's no limit to the breath of God. And what is the breath of God? It's the Spirit. It's the same word for breath and spirit. In Greek, it's pneuma, like where we get pneumatic, like a pneumatic drill. But in Hebrew, it is, what is it? Ruach. Yes, breath, spirit. So that's amazing to me, and I think that's also a cool little shadow picture of the Spirit without limit being given on Shavuot. You know, that kind of ties in with the first giving of the Torah. Now that's fascinating, and yet I want to take a look going forward for just a moment to the New Testament and the prophetic vision that you see there that references trumpets. And you have all mentioned a couple of little trumpet things here, but I want you to take a look at a couple of passages that mention trumpets. And you should do a little word search in your Bible for trumpets in the New Testament and see what it says, because I think it's all tied together very, very nicely. Here's what Yeshua says in Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. "Following the trouble of those times, the sun will grow dark, the moon will stop shining, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in heaven will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the tribes of the land will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with tremendous power and glory. He will send out his angels with a great shofar, and they will gather together his chosen people from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other." And then we'll see in just a moment from the Apostle John will tell us about these angels with shofars. So take a look at this next passage. This is from Rabbi Shaul, the Apostle Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 51. He says this, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed." This, I believe strongly with all of my heart that this is all tied together. That this night, this day, is when it will happen. We don't know when, what year, but this day, this Feast of Trumpets. Was someone calling me?
That second silver trumpet.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, looking at another one from Shaul, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 15, says this, "When we say this, we base it on the Lord's own words. We who remain alive when the Lord comes will certainly not take precedence over those who have died, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a rousing cry, with a call from one of the ruling angels, and with God's shofar. Those who died united with the Messiah will be the first to rise. Then we who are left alive will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we will always be with the Lord. So encourage one another with these words." And I think that this is one of the great things about this day, is that we should be encouraging one another regarding the Feast of Trumpets. Because I think for the believer, you need to remember that this is the day that you will be elevated. However, remember that when you look at, there are a lot of passages from the Old Testament prophets, and in previous years I have discussed this in more detail regarding the passages from the prophets talking about trumpets blowing in that day, speaking about future prophetic visions of trumpets sounding. It is not pretty. It is a day, you've heard Joel, there's a day of great distress and terror, and I will smite the earth and everyone will die. I mean, it sounds truly horrifying. But I think that this is what Paul's talking about when he says something like, we don't grieve as others do because we have a hope, that this is not a day of wrath for believers. There is a dichotomy here. This is a day of great judgment that is coming upon the whole earth. But for you, when you see all these things taking place, look up, because your salvation draws nigh. However, great destruction is coming for those who are not followers of God. Yes, that's this. The rest of the world will be in great terror.
So
But
they're supposed to be signs of hope to us.
yes,
And signs of woe to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
To change their mind.
absolutely. Tracy?
I think Joel 2:1 is a good
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, because of that word alarm, the root word for teruah is ruah.
Right.
He says, blow a trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm, ruah, in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh comes.
Right. Yep.
Day of darkness and gloominess. And
Yeah, it's truly horrific. But you know, in the Jewish festival of Rosh Hashanah also has some of those same elements. It's a great day of feasting and enjoyment of each other's company. However, there is an element of trepidation that it permeates the whole thing, because we know that I think that what is happening, and you can look in the book of the Revelation of Messiah that John wrote and see some of these prophetic shadow pictures coming forth, where, like, it seems to me in the vision that John is presenting to us that the heavenly court is coming to attention with the sound of the trumpet, and that the good books are opened. And that is why you will see that for these next 10 days that are happening in Judaism, these are called the days of awe. These are the days when they believe, and I think not without reason, that this is the days perhaps that the books are opened. And that they actually believe in Judaism that the books are opened starting with this night. that the heavenly court is called into session and the books are open and each person is judged based upon what they did last year. They will annul vows. They will try to pay back people that they owe money to, seek forgiveness for someone that they wronged, because the books are open and judgment is beginning. And on Yom Kippur, the day that is coming up in 10 days, is when the judgment is sealed. How much does that sound like the book of Revelation? A lot. And that is a fascinating connection. When you look at how the Jews talk about these festivals, especially these fall feasts, it is very much relates to the book of the Revelation, and I think that's what we're looking at here. And so we're gonna celebrate this with great joy, but there is also a sense of trepidation for us as well, that we need to be circumspect. We need to be examining ourselves and looking at not did I do well this year? Can I do better next year? This is not about making resolutions for the new year. This is about examining our hearts and seeing, are we loving each other? And that's the big thing that we're going to look at on Yom HaKippurim, the Feast of Atonement. It's tremendously powerful. Mike?
I was just thinking while you were talking about this, that this also kind of moves his first coming and his birth, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people speculate that it was in the 7th month that the Messiah was born.
Right.
And you have both this promise of hope, but you also have the tribulation from Herod and them running and hiding.
Yep. Absolutely.
There's just kind of this.
Absolutely. There's so much that we could cover here, but we could be here all night talking. And you know what? We'll eat and we'll talk. You know, you guys all share ideas. There's so many. We're going to blow our horns and we're going to shout. Hopefully we won't scare the children. And then
They can shout with us.
they can shout with us, absolutely. But no, I think for us, as I'm about to read this last little passage from the book of the Revelation, we want to call out to God for Him to remember us. You know what I'm saying? In a sense, and this is part of the tradition that I have adopted for myself, and I don't know who else does this, some Jews, some Christians, who knows. I think that the day of trumpets for us could be, and maybe should be, that we call out to God with our voices, with our trumpets, and we say, pay attention to us, notice us, here we are. The times are difficult. We are your people. Hear us. Please remember us. Remember your promises. And we've talked about that so many times when the patriarchs are praying. They are always remembering the promises of God and bringing them to His attention. Because He wants to be remembered. He wants us to remember those things, and He wants to be reminded of it. Tracy?
I think there's a really awesome duality to that concept of that we are also telling everyone else, the nations, to remember God
Yes.
at the same time.
Right. Absolutely. Angela?
I was just going to say, hang our red cord out the window.
Hang our red cord out the window. Absolutely. Yes. It's you.
Oh, it feels like to me it's a day of awareness.
Yes.
Self-awareness, spiritual awareness, world awareness.
Right.
Just a whole gamut of being aware in every way that God has given us, a mind, a brain, all the things that He's given to us as children of His, to be aware in every way that we can be aware. You get busy with your life, you get busy with work, you get busy with children. We have to remember to be aware, because you get busy and forget about being aware.
Yep.
Awareness is like looking in the mirror and really seeing things the way they really are.
Absolutely.
When you walk, exactly, because when you walk away from the mirror and you get busy, you forget about that awareness.
Well, and it's kind of funny that you said that. You know, it's about, like, I'm remembering James saying, don't look at yourself in a mirror and then walk away and immediately forget what you're like. And so you're absolutely right. We need to live deliberately and conscientiously and with being circumspect. Angela?
And isn't that what a trumpet does?
Yes.
You're aware.
It does.
Get your attention.
Absolutely it does.
Wake up.
Yep, wake up. That's right. Yes, ma'am.
What is the red cord?
That's a reference to Rahab, the innkeeper, the harlot from Jericho, who ties the red cord around her windowsill so that when the children of Israel come into the land to destroy everyone, that they are reminded, don't touch her and her family. And I think
the walls fall down, the rocks fall,
her and her family are delivered. They are the only ones in that whole city that are rescued. Keith?
I actually saw an archaeological special that showed when they found Jericho that there was a section of wall that still stood along the wall.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
I mean, it's true.
It's amazing.
Red's an important color for the
Oh, you bet it is.
doorposts and all the other.
Yeah. Wayne?
Yeah, I see some similarities with Passover.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Like, is that
I think it's definitely tied together. There's so many things that tie together, but yeah, that act of redemption is definitely there for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna read this one little tiny passage from Revelation. Then we're going to blow our shofars and shout to our God, ask Him to remember us, and then we're going to eat. And we're going to talk. Sound good? All right. So here is from John the Apostle in the book of the Revelation, chapter 8, verse 1. It says, "When the Lamb broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and they were given 7 shofars." And you know what happens next, right? They begin to blow these shofars, and there are 7 bowls, 7 woes, the bowl judgments, it's truly horrifying.
Yeah,
That's when the start. That's when a third of the was it a third of the
Yes.
stars go away?
Yeah, a third of the grasses are burnt and all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah, so there it is, folks. That's what I have for you. There's so much more, and we could be talking for hours, and we will, and please remember that you are welcome to stay here and fellowship with one another for just as long as you like, but I didn't want to wax too eloquent here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to say to the kids to come in. They can begin to scream with us. Yeah, and if you have a shofar, no, we can do it inside. I don't want to. We can go outside if you guys want to scare the neighbors. I'm totally cool with that. There are neighbors, yes. No, it's okay. But no, I would like for us to. If you have a shofar, grab it and blow it.
I don't have a shofar.
We don't, I have one, but I don't know how to play it, so it's all good. But you know what? And I think here's the thing, and I think that's why that Hebrew word can be translated as yelling and screaming or shofar, because if you don't know how to play one, you could scream.
Yep.
So,
Can we see your shofar?
yeah, absolutely. If you want to blow your shofar, what we'll do is, I think there couldn't be any possible thing that we could shout better than Shema. That we can all just say Shema, really loud. What does that mean? Hear. Pay attention. I think what could be better to shout? So who's got their trumpets? Who's got their horns? All right, so let's just do a little sample here real quick. One at a time, just to give you a little warm up, to see who can play it. I know. Okay, Keith's getting started here. Give it another one, Keith. Give it another one. I know, we're all amateurs.
It's okay.
It's a strangled animal.
Let someone else throw it out.
Nice job, thank you, Keith. Mikey, give it a shot, buddy. Let's see what you got.
Right.